Welcome today to Methods Mondays. This is a series where we hear from people in the field about how they approach different methodological problems, different methodological opportunities in their peace and conflict studies research. Today, we will be hearing from Dr. Karina Korostelina, who is a professor of conflict analysis and resolution at the Carter School, where she is also the director of the Peace Lab on reconciling conflicts and intergroup divisions. Dr. Korostelina has been a Fulbright New Century Scholar, a Rockefeller Writing Fellow, a fellow at the Eckert Institute for International Textbook Research, and the Institute of Advanced Studies at Waseda University, Northeast Asia Foundation, and the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. She's also been a visiting scholar at the Central European University and at the University of Singapore. Her scholarship has been supported by 46 grants, and the results of her research have been presented at numerous international conferences in more than 90 articles and chapters. She's also the author or editor of 16 books, including the sole author of Social Identity and Conflict, Structures, Dynamic, and Implications, published in 2007, History and Education in the Formation of Social Identity Toward a Culture of Peace in 2013, Constructing the Narratives of Identity and Power in 2013, International Insult, How Offense Contributes to Conflict, published in 2014, Trump Effect, published in 2016, and Neighborhood Resilience and Urban Conflict, published in 2021. So today, Dr. Korostelina will be discussing research during wartime. She'll be discussing challenges and creative approaches to conducting survey and interview research during a war. And she'll be discussing her work in particular with Dr. Gerard Toal to design and implement both survey and interview research in war-torn areas of Ukraine during the years of 2022 and 2023. She'll be discussing how to generate dispositional complexity in measurements of the independent variable and support the independent variable being support for war or peace by posing dilemmas rather than direct questions. So Dr. Korostelina, I don't know if you have any additional things to add there, or if you want to just go ahead and get ready with your presentation.
I will share the screen. Thank you for introduction. Happy to be here. So I prepared like very simple PowerPoint just to show you some ideas with results, how actually it's impact the process of conducting research during the war. So I have several points here. First of all, if you start developing proposal and start developing the research materials during the war, you have to realize that it's a very long process. And developing the data of like developing the instruments of data collection is extremely taking a very long process. First of all, the questionnaire or even survey instruments can create a lot of problems for people who engage in during the war situation. So you really need to be very careful in how you build the questions. And in this case, it's very important. Even like, for example, in Ukraine, I was from Ukraine myself, and I was engaged in Ukrainian conflict for a long time. In this situation, I really saw that it's the dynamics of war, let's put this way, the dynamics of war really clear for people on the ground, much clearer for people on the ground. And it's very important to realize that specific word or specific phrase can lead to stress among people. So it's very important to consult. So then we were developing this question and interviews. We consulted with our colleagues in Ukraine. We consulted with several other people engaged in working there as an international expert. So the development of the questionnaire itself took a long time, like really thinking about every particular word. This is very important stage. Moreover, usually if you work in countries which other language, translation is extremely important. So especially in situation of war. So in our situation, we engage at least 4 people who use the language, both languages, who are actually multilingual in the way to be sure that we translate the our questionnaires in a very right way, that it really represents the meaning which we first put in the English language. Moreover, sometimes it was interesting that while we were developing questions, we were looking in the Ukrainian or Russian meaning first before we will put question in English language, to be sure that it sounds right in the right way and it sounds in a important way which important for people. Moreover, why we translated it's also in 2 languages, both Russian and Ukrainian. It's because the people still, even now when we just run in April 2nd survey, still people had the preference of what language they want to speak, and still even after 14 months of the war, multiple people prefer to conduct interviews or questionnaires in Russian language. So if you work in a country where multiple languages are represented, it's always better to have your instrument translated into multiple languages to give opportunity for people to choose, especially if it's a conflict dynamic, especially if conflict created with several groups. Second, a very important stage after questions are developed. Again, don't expect that you sit for 5 minutes, create questions, and you're ready to go. Second very important moment is to actually have a small sample of respondents to test. And it's applied both to surveys and applied both to interviews. And this is what we did in Ukraine in all 3 waves, like our first survey, our second survey, and interview collection. We ran a small sample of respondents. For survey, we had 30. For interview, we had 5, because it's a long interview, where we ran all our questions to see how people perceive them, what are variations of results. And we get from our people who were collecting fast data, we get a very profound report, deep report on how each question was perceived, how people are reacting for the question. And we also run statistical analysis on the questions to see if they give us specific representation. Of course, when you conduct a survey, you expect that all surveys should give you pretty good representation of answers, right? Run as and give you good power to differentiate between respondents. In situation of war, it's not always true. In situation of war, and you will see, there are some questions where 90–80% of people say yes, and I will show you how in a few minutes how we suggest, or I suggest, to deal with this issue. So, but again, after we receive this information, we will work on a way how we can adjust, how we can address concerns of interviewers, which question worked, which question we needed to paraphrase a little bit. So it also took additional time, at least a month, for us to get all information, to rework it again. And only after that, after we had this pre-test results, we submitted questions for final approval for IRB. That's why I really want to, first of all, stress that it's a long process. It's a very time-consuming process. So even if you want to develop the interview questions, not survey, which taken always much more longer time to develop, you really have to be given a time and adjustment time to submit instruments. Second, of course, it takes time. IRB also will be looking more specifically and deeply into your questions because you conduct research during the situation of war. Second point which I wanted to stress is the how you create the sample. Usually it's much easier to do a sample. Let me do a slideshow so it's probably will increase, yes. So it's better to do sample in easier to do sample if you analyze residents of the towns. But in the situation of war, you also will have a lot of IDPs, and how you deal with IDPs really depends on deep knowledge of social structures which just emerged in situation of war, where you find IDPs, how to make the sample representative. You really have to speak to the city council, to NGOs working with IDPs, with international organization with supporting IDPs, to realize how IDP population is structured within the cities or rural areas where you want to do research. What are ways how to approach them? What are rules of approaching them? So this requires very long research, very throughout research to understand how you organize your sample, how you approach people. So it's another very important part of conducting research during the war. Third, a very important lessons learned, you really need to ask reverse questions, not just a direct question. Of course, in situation of war, you expect and you even might be afraid to ask questions which might sound unethical. But what you will see, and I will show you in a second, that if you also not only ask direct questions, but you ask reverse questions, you will actually get more closer results. What it really indicates, and I will show you some data, what it indicates that during the situation of war, there are a lot of pressure, social norms pressure, and people tend to answer as expected rather than how they really feel. And only if you ask reverse questions, they might be more revealing. For example, the same theoretical construct, we measure it by asking there's a strong difference between Ukrainian and Russian citizens. And you see, yes, majority of people are very strongly agree, very small level of disagreement. However, when we ask Russian and Ukraine have very similar cultures, then you see more even distribution. So a lot of people might agree with it because they see that the question is asked in particular way. So for example, to measure social boundary and symbolic boundary, it was very important for us to see if boundary is still there or people actually just separate themselves from the state, but not people, not culture. And this was something which is very important to inform decisions of political entities and international organizations. Similarly, I want to show you that when we ask, it's very important to be better people than Russians for Ukrainian. Yes, again, you see very strong agreement with that. However, then you ask Ukrainian must see Russians as equally normal, which is reverse question. You see more distribution of the answers. People may be more open to express their opinions. And one more example, then we ask Ukrainians are spiritually stronger than Russians. You have stronger opinions than you ask, then Russians and Ukrainians have similar morals. Again, you see how direct questions create more agreement, while if you ask reverse questions, you can actually see what actually really in minds of people and how they agree with that. Next very important point is that you need to explore dilemmas rather than ask direct questions. In situation of war, then people ask direct questions, they tend to say yes. They say to strongly agree with it. For example, when we ask people if undivided national territory is an essential value of Ukrainian nation, you see we have got a very strong agreement. But then we ask people, is Ukrainian cause of war sacred to me? We also get a very strong agreement which connected to it. However, then we ask people the most sacred value in life, safety of myself, my family, you see the same strong agreement again. So is war important for me, for you and Ukrainian nation? Yes. Territory, yes. Life, yes. So of course, all of them very important for people. That's why, but unfortunately, in situation of war, people experience multiple dilemmas. They are really torn between need to protect their family, but also wanting their country to have integrity and protect territory. So to address this issue, and we knew that it will be an issue, so we actually give several dilemmas for people. One way, for example, we should be concerned about our life and well-being, not question of territory and geopolitics. So we brought together in question two options, both territory and well-being. And you see the distribution become almost equal, almost the same amount of people agree or disagree with this position. Similarly, then we put together against each other the idea that ceasefire for stopping Ukrainian men and protecting Ukraine, again, you see very strong distribution. We even ask very specific questions where we present people, what is more important for you? Save life of Ukrainian soldiers or continue war to free all Ukrainian territories? And again, you see very equal, basically, distribution of results, and some people select more. It really helped us to, first of all, show different opinion within Ukraine, because a lot of publications which were based on direct questions were showing all Ukrainians feel the same, everyone feels the same. It's helped to show that there are multiple views on it, but the most important, this distribution help us to address our research questions about, for example, how exposure to violence impact perception of war and peace, or how threats, how people perceive threats and how it's lead to support for peace or war. Similarly, we ask people, as you see here, what is important more, reparation for war crimes or full cooperation with Russia? And again, you see people give very different opinions on this. This is one more examples of opinions. And third example, again, if we would ask people, what is important? Financial compensation, they tell yes. Do you need apology from Russia? Yes. But then you put them against each other. What is more important, financial compensation or apology? Then people show what is more important for them, what really constitutes their belief, what is the key for the process. And five, the fifth, my suggestion when you conduct the research during the war is experimental design. I really suggest to use experimental designs, again, because people are exposed to social norms, because there is a lot of pressure in situation of war, and it's hard for people to actually even distinguish for themselves how they feel because of the threats, of stress, of pressure. Then it's interesting to see if you will give different introduction or different questions, how people react and will it change or not. So for example, what we run with this experimental design, we randomly assign all our respondents to 3 conditions. first group will ask, how much do you support negotiation with Russia to complete ceasefire? And it was just direct question. Then we ask another third by telling that Zelensky support negotiation with Russia or complete ceasefire. If he will support it, will you support it? And you see that, and the third one, let me first explain and then I will tell. So, and the third group was also told, if your leaders of European Union and United States support ceasefire, will be you supporting it? And you see that actually it gave us opportunity to measure impact of Zelensky and impact of leaders on opinion of people. Because again, if we will be asking them directly, we probably will get very unified opinions. Do you support President Zelensky? Yes. Do you support? And we actually did ask these questions and we get very unified opinions. To really measure, it's good to represent very creative experimental designs where you give different conditions to people and see which conditions really impact on their opinions. In this case, you see that actually Zelensky position will increase people agreement with peace, while position of European Union actually will decrease support for people for peace. So I will stop here, just sharing with you 5 suggestions, and I will be happy to answer your questions and go deeper into questions which you have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Korostelina. And just as we go into this question and answer session, for everyone, if you have a question that you'd like to ask over audio, you can use the raise hand feature. If you'd prefer not to over audio, you can put questions in the chat and I can read them out to Dr. Korostelina. But as you all kind of formulate what you might like to ask, I'll go ahead and ask the first question. Dr. Korostelina, you've given us some very concrete suggestions for how to handle a wartime situation, active wartime situation. I was wondering if you might be able to talk about any of the ethical concerns that arise here that that don't arise necessarily when you don't have an active war going on.
Of course, you always have to be, thank you very much. Of course, you, as I told you, always have to be very concerned about not to harm people again. And you also have to be very sure that you're not just using this research for your own purposes. I think for me, it was very important person. I'm not just interested for my publication, academic publication, or just to even to develop a theory further. What we did, as soon as we received results, together with my colleague, we immediately published. We actually came up with 14 publications and presentations in leading newspapers and leading political think tank to represent results and inform policymaking and to challenge some opinions which people have about the Ukrainian war. So to really provide a data, which is very important. That's why I think people who conduct research during the war and just publish academic publications, really, from my point of view, honestly, it's a little bit unethical, use the situation. But if you clearly have practice-oriented goal of this research, and in addition to extending theory and advancing understanding, you also share results as much as you can, and give opportunity for policymakers and for international community to see situation of war more clearly and opinion of people more clearly, then I think it's justify engagement. But also what we found, it's really interesting, especially it's clear, more clearly visible in interviews. People really want to talk about it. People really want to share opinions. It's some kinds of psychotherapy for people to be able to answer this opinions. I myself conducted pilot interviews while I was in Poland and Czech Republic, and some of my interviews were like 2-3 hours. because people just want to talk. It's basically just ask one question and you listen and listen. And of course, it's extremely emotional and extremely hard. I myself, when I was doing this research, I'm not in a country. I'm not exposed to all this violence, but just hearing the stories of people, seeing them crying, it was very, very stressful for me. It took me basically several months just to recover from level of depression which I experienced during this research.
Thank you. Yeah, I know this is these are questions that we have to face in this field head on, right? Is kind of what I'm hearing from you, is that it has to be part of the design from the get-go. Angie.
Thank you, and good to see you, Karina, again.
Good
It's
to
been a
see
long
you.
time since I last saw you. And thanks for sharing the results or the findings of your research so far. I'm sure it's very challenging to conduct a research at this moment, given the conflict and violence. But this is very interesting, particularly for me as well, because the two countries I am working on are somehow are still in a conflict. So the conflict has not been fully resolved and the countries are not safe. And for that, I wanted to ask you, what is the best way to conduct interviews with people inside the countries when it's not that safe? Like, is there a specific platform that's safer than the other? Was it easy or hard for you to find people who would be willing to talk online? And you mentioned that some people were enthusiastic, they want to share their experience. Do you think that this enthusiasm might decrease if the conflict is if the context is a protracted conflict? And thirdly, the last one also, since that some interviews took very long, were people willing to report these interviews after assuring them that this is going to be confidential and the records will be destroyed once the transcripts are written, and ensure all the confidentiality measure? Does the context, when it's a conflict, when it's a war, does the conflict really impact whether people accept that they record what they say or it doesn't? These are the questions on my mind right now.
Very, very good questions. First of all, there is a special procedure which we had to follow. First of all, of course, we are not interviewing people on the battlefield, but very close. And there were several situations where the raids and people had to go to and escape. So that's why it's very important. Then part of interviewing of people was that they, as soon as there is a requirement to go to raid, interview is stopped and return back, and the people need to escape. So this was very important part to really, and also to conduct interview in safe places, safe zones, and so on. It was very, very important. The interviews were all conducted in person. We didn't do online interviews. If we have opportunity to do in-person interviews, I strongly suggest to have in-person interviews rather than online. It's still possible, exactly. We should not exclude it, because in many conflict zones, you could not actually even access people, right, as a researcher. So all interviews were done in person, and the whole first round of 1,800 interviews, also surveys, also were done in person. In this case, we actually had a partner in Ukraine, which we worked for, I don't know, 30 years to 25 years, who we trust, but we also were engaged in every step, who collected data in Ukraine specifically. To conduct pilot interviews, I went myself to Poland and Czech Republic to work with refugees. And again, I did preliminary research how I found Ukrainian refugees. And one of the suggested route by the local NGOs and local scholars was for me to go to places where they learn language, Polish and Czech language, and sit there with them during the lesson, and then slowly engage and ask who want to participate in an interview with me. This moment, then you come into refugees and tell them, you know what, I want to interview you. It's not something which works so easily, the trust building. And I can tell you in some moments, people were very suspicious why I'm interviewing them. So this, you have basically elevator speech. You have 5 minutes to build trust with people you interview, or they will just leave. So it's require a lot of skill, but it's also require engagement. It's require honesty in why you're doing this research. And for them, similar, as I told Audrey, it was very important that results will not be just for my own use as academic, but I promised them that it will be published, and we did. It published in newspapers, share it with policymakers. For me, it's very important part that I given them this promise, and it was important for them to engage with me. So this technique really did work. I was able to get multiple people to answer my questions, to participate with me. And again, there were some of them were pretty lasting long. Of course, I use also work with my colleagues who already have established relationships with refugees, so it was much easier for build on the already existing networks with others, your colleagues in the countries. But again, every time you contact a person who are affected by war, it's always a moment of building trust, always a moment to know that person is willing to share the information they want to. I can asking your third question, how many people would be interested? I see decline. We had a high acceptance during the first wave of interviews in last year and the summer last year, and we had much less wave of acceptance of people who wanted to talk in April, but still we were able to collect all data we needed. I don't know if did I answer all your questions. Let me know if you.
Yeah, I think the last one is if people were willing that you would record the interviews.
Oh yeah, yes. So yes, we did record interviews, of course, because we need to have a text of interview, and of course it will be all destroyed, and people didn't have actually issues with that at all. That interview will be recorded. We didn't do recording, video recording, because we did everything in person. But I know from other experiences, when you conduct Zoom interview, people not very comfortable with recording, especially when you have a video recording. And I know that in multiple cases, people were rejecting interview because they agreed for interview, but as soon as they learn it will be recorded, they didn't want to be recorded. So it's a moment and you have to be ready to start taking notes.
We have other questions in the audience. You can raise your hand or you can put them in the chat and I can read them out. But as we wait for that, I actually had a very, very specific question. And this goes to, and I really appreciated how you discussed how much care and attention goes into the language, especially because it is in multiple languages. The use of the word sacred. where does that come from? I saw it on a few of the questions, and I just wanted to know why that particular word versus a different type of word to represent kind of the importance.
Yes, because then you do surveys, you usually build, it's very different approach to survey and to interview. Surveys usually build on preset set of theories. They arrive from theoretical background, and each question is measuring particular set of variables. Before you start even designing survey, you define which theories you want to test. You define your dependent, independent variables, your mediators, your moderators, and then you developing. First of all, you're looking for options which are available, because for many mediators and moderators, you already have scales available, and for dependent, independent variables. But in some cases, you don't. So you need to develop your own questions. And by the way, I will return to it. It's a very good question in a second regarding the already available scales. But for this particular sacred, we use this theory of sacred values and territory as sacred. This theory is developed by several scholars several years ago on study of the Middle East conflict, and how territory becomes sacred value for people, so they're ready to sacrifice their life because territory more sacred than themselves, or even life of their families and their children. And that's why we wanted to measure, and we have multiple questions: what is sacred in your life, and so on. And we did find that yes, territory as a sacred value is very important for people. It's become one of the most sacred values, and people ready to sacrifice their life for it. See territory as something which is more important than saving lives of other people. But speaking about the scales, it's actually very interesting. We just submitted a paper for Peace and Conflict Journal where we were also measuring threats. And what we found is that usually you measure in social psychology, you measure any variables using at least 2, 3, 4 questions using already existing scales. And we measured threat again. We use the scale for realistic threat, for symbolic threat, and for identity threat. So we use 12 questions to measure these variables. And what we actually found, that in situation of war, people distinguish between threats. They do not combine them. The same scale worked very well when we did research in the United States on political conflict. They will have a strong coherency between them. We had a very strong high alpha, like 8 something points, with alpha measuring how strong interconnected questions on a scale. In situation of war in Ukraine, we didn't have basically no connection between what happened, and this I wrote in an article which we just submitted, that in situation of war, each threat was perceived completely separately, because people concentrate on threats, because threats were really important in their life. So it was a very, like, realistic, for example, a realistic threat is measured by the threat to your life, to your well-being, to your family. And usually it's if United States, it's all people see it together. In Ukraine, it was completely different. So threat to property was very different from the threat to well-being and from life to the life. So it's also very important that understand that in some cases, scales, very well developed scales, which applied in many other situations, really do not work.
Thank you. I have another question, and again, if anyone has any, you can put them in the chat. But one point you've come back to throughout this talk is the importance of networks. So building strong networks. And that's how you are able to do this kind of months-long work. And I'm going to take the prerogative as a PhD student for those of us who are kind of more, we have our own networks, but, we're at the beginning of our academic journeys, or might be setting off to do research where we don't have those networks necessarily. What is it like to start building those? Do you have any tips and tricks for things to be attentive to, and how to do that in a way that is, not extractive? And as you said, just focused entirely on what is this going to do for me in my career?
It's a very good question. Yeah, building networks take a long time, very long time. I actually do remember then we did research in Turkey with a group of my students, and we were like overwhelmed with interviews, how much we were able to get during this visit, because we used, again, my network and network of several other students who were actually from Turkey and have connections. And once we were sitting in Istanbul in a cafe having nice Turkish coffee, and one person came to us and introduced himself. He was a PhD student conducting research also in Turkey. And he was so frustrated and told, guys, I hear you like discussing, I'm sorry that I overheard you discussing your research. I'm here already for 3 weeks and I'm not able to get any interview. And so he hopes that he come here, jump in, and he will, like, people will start talking to him. It doesn't work this way, unfortunately. Life, unfortunately, what important for building networks, of course, long engagement, but I strongly believe also in reciprocity. You build strong networks also only if you contribute to them. If you provide support for other scholars, they will help you, but you also have to creatively think how you can support these people, what you can give them for their help. And it's not like artificial exchange, like I am giving it to you, you're giving me to this. It's really what I call more social reciprocity, because people can have different needs, but engagement, constant engagement with people, very, very important part. And for you as a young scholars, what is important, for example, this new initiative which we have now with the graduate research symposium. I think this is a perfect opportunity to spend more time. Don't do it online. Online, like, for what I really feel that this 3-year gap of online meetings and collaboration really changed how people see networks and how people were able to engage. It's a lost time for networking for a lot of PhD students. So if you can go in person to conferences, if you can go in person to events, just do it, because then you have time after the event, before the event, to engage, to talk. This is something which important for networking again.
Thank you. And actually, we have a question from Susan Allen, and I think this is kind of along that same theme. She says, I'm interested in the team you engaged with to do this research. What different strengths were represented in the team? What advice do you have for people considering collaborative research?
I strongly believe in collaborative research. I love collaboration and I love multidisciplinary engagement. I think we all live in this silo of our methodology, of our theory, of our approach. So I was lucky from very early stages of my career to be able to escape this silo of specific discipline and to be engaged with scholars from different disciplines. so I always learn a lot from it. And every project like this starts with negotiation. How do you, on epistemology, because then you work people from different disciplines. For example, Gerard Toal, my dear colleague, he's geographer. He has very different epistemology than I do as a social psychologist, very different. So we actually spend time and lunches together just explaining each other what is our epistemology of our discipline and what results we expect from it. Second, like for example, when I work with historians, again, I had to, it's completely different approach, exactly different epistemology, how to deal with that. But I think mutual respect and also clear finding who is more contributing to each project, each product. It's very, very important moment of trustful relationships. We always immediately agree who for more contributing to particular piece, who is the leading author on this piece or on another piece, and how we trustfully develop our project further, how we give feedback to each other without offending each other or accepting suggestions of the other person. So it's thank you, Susan. It's exactly, I think the collaboration is art and collaboration is coming from the heart, but collaboration also produce much more interesting results than you would be doing it alone.
So I have a little bit of a follow-up question to that. Just talking about how much work and time goes into developing those relationships at the very beginning and kind of setting out, right, what are the expectations? In our field, practice is a key component. We are a practice-oriented field. That's not necessarily the same in other fields, and not to broad brush it either, you know, the practices in other disciplines, but for our field, it is perhaps a little bit more one of the main purposes of the work. How do you handle that? How does that work? Do you find that your colleagues have those same practice-oriented approaches? How does that work for, again, just thinking about the different disciplines that people will go back to or the different networks that people will go back to with this research? How do you plan for the practice basically from the get-go?
It still depends on the project. Like, for example, this is the National Science Foundation project, which is not interested in practice. They're just interested in policy implications. That's why. But there are some other projects when practice is the key. And then you, for example, I recently just completed work in Lebanon, which didn't have open war, but does have a lot of tensions and a lot of very complex economic and social divisions right now. So in this case, the whole project was a practice project, but even you do a practice, you still learn from it. You still develop a lot of ideas for future conflicts, and you, as Susan is perfect in doing this. She has an entire book about it, how you reflect on practice of network and how you build theory based on your practice. And I think what is unique about our school, I was just thinking about it, that then artificial intelligence will be taken over all universities. Our school probably will be the last man standing, because all we teach, it's come from our experience working in multiple countries, doing the real work. It's something which you could not produce through artificial intelligence texts, and it's not compilation of textbooks which students also can read. What we share at our classes is real experience of real project, and this I think make our school strongly unique and also strongly valuable for students who come into the school.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes. I don't know if there's anyone else. Okay, yeah, we have a question from Dr. Rebecca Nicholson. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Is there a way to access the recent article you mentioned publishing about the differentiation of threats?
As soon as it's published, yes. It's now in the process of review.
Yeah, and just for those of us who are on the call, if you're not in our school, you can always keep an eye out on our website, social media, those things can kind of come through. Again, you can find Dr. Korostelina's books there, also Dr. Susan Allen, who organized this event. She's the Henry Hart Rice Chair at the school. You can see her book as well that Dr. Korostelina mentioned. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. But for now, Dr.
I can just share. Let me see. I'm just opening I will share this media appearances related to this research specifically. So you can, if somebody interested, you can copy and I'm trying to see how. Just a second. It's a lot, so I'm trying to copy them all. Okay, so that's a Zoom, so I will copy in the chart. It's a lot of my message is too long. Okay. Okay, let's a second. I will return back and do it in small themes.
Yeah. To your question, Hamad, yeah, this is being recorded, and so it will be placed on the Carter School's YouTube. I can't say exactly when, but hopefully.
Again, it's too long. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just trying. Okay, I will select maybe one or two. So like this free. Hope it will be not too long. Okay, this is like examples. Again, we had 14 of them. I just put several.
Yeah, so since we have a few minutes left, I don't know, Dr. Korostelina, are there any other things that you want to really underline or you didn't have a chance to say about this kind of research?
No, that's why I really was hoping, that's why I didn't do a long presentation. I really wanted to hoping to answer specific questions rather than give you like, this is what I think. Yeah. So I just identified these 5 topics, and I really encourage students to think creatively how you get information. One more message which I want to stress, that like, well, I already told, but I want to stress it, that be creative how you get variations of information, how you ask people to be able to get multiple opinions rather than yes types of answers. So use reverse questions, use dilemmas, use experimental design in your questions. So to be able to give voices for people who feel that threatened by expressing their own opinions or having different views on the majority of people.
Thank you. Yeah, I found as a PhD researcher, I found going through a lot of those examples to be really useful. So just want to say thank you very much for being here today for our Methods Mondays. Again, to all those who joined, thank you for being here. This is recorded. It will go up on our website, so you'll be able to go back to those very specific examples Dr. Korostelina gave. Thank you as well to Dr. Susan Allen, who has been organizing these Methods Mondays series, so you can find previous Methods Mondays on the website as well. But just again, thank you, Dr. Korostelina. It's been a very interesting conversation.
And thank you, Audrey, for leading us today, being our leader for this conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.